The Freezing Twister Amazon Huntress returns. Several weeks have passed since the release of the original guide video. Lots of testing has taken place since then, resulting in some changes that have dramatically increased the build's overall performance. So here it is, the official late endgame version of the build. A new meta has recently emerged with many builds foregoing movement speed in favor of Whirling Slash as a combination movement and attack skill. This skill was already a no-brainer to include in any Twister build, and through the Amazon's strengths and accuracy stacking, we can make her faster and stronger than just about anything else that currently exists in the game. The build still utilizes Cull of the Brotherhood to force these same lightning twisters into cold damage, just like before. This grants easier access to frenzy charges from Combat Frenzy, as well as the powerful Ice Bite buff without losing shock or innervate. And it streamlines cold exposure penetration and other sources of elemental damage into one element. Due to the reintroduction of Dance of Destruction as a most reliable way to achieve elemental twisters, Stormlance has been dropped from the build in favor of Cull the Weak for even more on-demand speed and frenzy charges. Whether a simple ritual encounter in a map, or the final wave of a +4 simulacrum, these twisters make a complete mockery of arena-like content. Its combination extreme shotgun damage scaling with the high mobility makes it incredibly well balanced at handling breaches in either tight areas or out in the open. Even in its least favorable settings, the build still performs quite well in larger rooms against the tankiest of bosses, allowing the player to continually leech tons of life and mana, and deal damage passively while focusing on the fight's mechanics. The coolest part is this build can be played in a variety of ways, either super aggressively or defensively, or somewhere in between, depending on the preference and confidence of the player piloting it. Welcome to a build showcase and final endgame update to this all-in-one Freezing Twister Amazon Huntress build. Hey guys, what's going on? Snoo here. I know it's long past time I came out with this video, a sort of build update showcase for the guide for the Twister build that I've been running the entire 0.2 patch. We're now 0.2G and had a nice loot update. It's brought some people back to the game, and I've definitely seen a little bit of increased interest in this build, so we are going to be focusing completely on the build, the major updates that have taken place since the earlier guide from before a few weeks ago. They didn't even have Whirling Slash back then or Cull the Weak, two major updates, which I have made separate videos, so I've certainly given you guys some nice breadcrumbs. Any of this sort of, in-depth information about that, the whys, about different choices, different support gems, and yeah, I know there are definitely a few changes that have taken place, and many of you guys have requested this, so let's get started with this video. I feel like I gave you guys a pretty nice showing in terms of combat, so you could see the first couple minutes in the intro. Hope you liked it. It was definitely a lot of work to do something like that. I know it makes it very pleasant to watch, and including a lot of key information like why Cull the Brotherhood, why, these boots, we got the ring, the boots, and then the shield. They are the build enabling pieces. The other two uniques are luxury slots. But we'll talk about the gear in a second. Just so you can see, all I'm doing is moving on here. I got a Whirling Slash of 0.16. Let's actually take a look at the number here. These are some pretty important numbers. Attack time 0.16. Main hand accuracy for the skill with bullseye support 45,000. And attacks per second 6.29 there. So those are some pretty nice numbers, and you can only achieve those kind of numbers in a few different ways, like attribute stacking or accuracy stacking, which is much more in alignment with the Amazon, of course, and due to her critical strike and penetrate ascendancy points. That's why I recommend accuracy stacking with the Amazon, not with the Deadeye. Honorable mention to the Deadeye. Would be really nice to run with this build with a Tangle Tongue weapon instead of a rare. Certainly Tangle Tongue would be cheaper than this rare, but there are some other issues with that build, like how are you going to do the movement speed. You're going to have to deal with weapon swap and the delays that come through there. That's just a few things I want to get off the top out of the way. Definitely some of the big questions that I've been asked. But yeah, I'm not going to run a map this time. I'm just going to sort of quickly explain the rotation in case you kind of didn't see other videos. Not much of this has really changed. I used to have a button here, either Lightning Spear or Storm Lance, but I've removed them and decided that I'm basically just pressing right click, holding right click, and then pressing left click sometimes to do Cull the Weak. Usually I will attempt to target an enemy that is far away. I can reach as far as the very corner end of the screen, and sometimes that works and I can kind of port there and then kill it and get a frenzy charge that way. But generally speaking, the important rotation, which can be done out of combat, is simply barrage into Twister, with salvo being at 3 and coming up back off cooldown quickly thanks to the anointment anticipation, which does indeed work with salvo, even though it says it doesn't. But yeah, there's 4 buttons to the build. Barrage and Twister are used occasionally, and then Cull the Weak and Whirling Slash are more on the spamming front of that. And Cull the Weak actually has some surprisingly decent single target damage if you put a bunch of damage links in there, which I have done and which we will see shortly. But first, we're going to go through the normal pacing of all this. We'll start with the gear. I already kind of showed the weapon, and this weapon is pretty fantastic. As you can see from the intro, I'm working on a new one. So cross your fingers. Kind of doubt I'll probably finish that because it'll be crazy expensive to do it on average. But we do have one here, and you know what? I think I might even save a little something special here at the end of the video involving this weapon, so stay tuned for that. Definitely going to want to prioritize these prefixes. They're the most important things, although I would say attack speed, local roll is super important. Either crit hit chance or crit damage if you possibly can. I think crit damage is actually better here in this case because we get a whole bunch of flat crit anyway, but this does help cover my bases and allow me some flexibility in the passive tree, you know, to go to crit multi instead of crit chance, that sort of thing. But yeah, that's the weapon. Definitely going to want a flying spear for Twister because increased projectile speed with this weapon is a local modifier. And these Twisters move fast, my friends. And it's very important they move fast because I also move fast. And if I want those Twisters to stay in front of me and clear things in front of me, allow me to keep leeching mana and life, which is what's happening there. I can't really demonstrate that out of combat, but you know, you can see I chunk my mana pretty heavily here when I start using Cull the Weak especially. But it's absolutely no problem, as long as I just keep moving, keep killing, keep clearing, and keep being relatively safe by those incredibly fast moving Twisters. Next up, we'll just cover the other side of the weapon, which is the shield, and this shield is build enabling for here. If I remove this shield, I mean, let me just remove it here and you'll see what happens to my Whirling Slash time, okay? That's a lot slower, and this is a lot more like it, right? So this shield is basically in charge of giving me an insane amount of increased speed, which also counts for Twister cast rate as well as Cull the Weak attack rate, and since that's, you know, how I'm moving, that's incredibly important. Definitely makes it worthwhile. Also gives me a tiny bit of armor. 40% block chance isn't nothing, and 2 sockets as opposed to, I don't know, 0 if I ended up doing what a lot of people are doing, which is Dance with Death, which is obviously the easier and cheaper version since you don't even need to get an offhand, and this is certainly quite powerful and very good to level with, I will say. But you know, once you can get your hands on the shield and get a decent amount of accuracy, it actually becomes a much more potent than 25% more skill speed with nothing in the offhand. Wake of Destructions, I used to pull these out and didn't use them anymore because the movement speed was so crippling for the build, and I used Storm Lance as a reliable way to get shocked to ground, and you know, that was definitely a very legitimate build, pretty cool. But now that movement speed doesn't matter at all, almost at all, well, we're gonna, especially since we're moving crazy fast and combat super fast, I want the most reliable way I can get an elemental whirlwind for elemental twisters. And since elemental twisters means 50% more damage as its own multiplier, that's really important to get that all the time. So in order to guarantee that, we're going to use Wake of Destruction, which turns the twisters into lightning, but then Cull the Brotherhood turns them back into cold, which is just absolutely terrific. Has huge benefits for Combat Frenzy, always freezing enemies, I mean, like 4 or 5 screens away. Combat Frenzy is going off like basically on cooldown, so that just works really well there. It means I don't have to worry about like electrocute or pin or anything else. It also has great synergies with things like this, exposed to the cosmos, and, you know, cold penetration, other forms of cold penetration you might get, as well as cold exposure, which is coming on here. Not just any cold exposure, but strip away on top of that an extra 5, and that's a 30% cold exposure, and that works on every enemy, and that is basically getting every enemy hit by Whirling Slash is going to have 30% reduced cold resistance, and that's going to be incredibly important, especially on those super high delirious maps. Even for the trash mobs, I mean, they can become pretty tanky, but especially for those magic, rare, and unique enemies in maps. For the record, I do think I'm going to try to remove Cull the Brotherhood. It makes the gearing process extremely tight with the resistance requirement, trying to get life on every single piece. I literally can't get life or accuracy on this ring slot since I'm using this ring, and I know the build could be faster, more potent, powerful, and maybe with some more rarity on gear. So I'm going to look into it, but I'm definitely going to lose some really nice stuff, some of the things that I've just mentioned, by dropping this ring. Stay tuned for a future version maybe as I begin to experiment with that. So this is essentially the last time I think I'm going to be wearing this ring, unless I really don't like what I see after I take it off. The other ring is what I would like both rings to look kind of like, although I wouldn't need a Life Leech and Mana Leech on each. I just need one copy of Mana Leech, one copy of Life Leech. Really, really important for this build to have one of each, and that's going to make things much easier. Without having a Life Leech, there's really no point in even using a life-based build. You might as well just run an ES version of the build, which means you would go back up into the monk tree like so many other people. But I really like the life version of the build, and don't even need to take Mystic Harvest. I realized that was actually a bit overkill, so didn't even take that anymore. We're just doing so much physical damage with Twisters and Cull the Weak as well. Not to mention Whirling Slash, it's almost all physical damage. Well, I mean, I guess like a third of my damage is elemental, but that's just so much physical damage. It really works, really kicks those leeches into overdrive. Obviously, I would like to get accuracy and life on this ring, but I don't even have the highest tier accuracy here, so this ring is definitely a little short of what I want, but it's just such amazingly rolled ring. Otherwise, I just haven't been able to replace it. Can't really find anything better. The amulet here has perfect prefixes. I am now on the most restrictive gear setup in terms of spirit. Running a lot of spirit here. What is my spirit? 231. It needs to be about 200 or 210, I think, to run everything. At least 210 for precision. So we're getting spirit here. We're getting spirit in the chest as well. Alright, you can see I'm running a Moria Invictus, and you can get Spirit in the chest another way. By the way, Moria Invictus really just doing one thing special. It's giving me either, in this case, a whole bunch of rarity, or a whole bunch of extra life. That would be 200 life or 40% rarity, depending on what you're going for. This is definitely the more expensive route. I kind of miss the life version. The sacrifice here by using this chest is you sacrifice a bunch of evasion. You might recall that I used to have, like this point here, Bestial Skin, and definitely not doing that with this chest. And this has kind of chunked my evasion down with, you know, Frenzy Charge acquired recently. This number goes up to around 40%, but it would probably be smarter to get a little bit of extra evasion. I've been pleasantly surprised at how not important evasion is after I attempted to use this chest, so I stuck with it. Headhunter, definitely going to want this. We really don't get a huge amount of value, especially with Cull the Brotherhood, with an Ingenuity belt, which is still what a lot of people are using, so Headhunter is definitely great here. Headhunter helps scale attack speed even more than movement speed, by the way, in maps, so you get some major speed boost with Headhunter. I've seen my Whirling Slash go all the way down to 0.9 seconds, mainly on account of if Headhunter procs as well as Fall the Axe at the same time. I mean, that can be pretty insane. You get the haste aura buff, you know, all that other stuff. That can be really, really fast. It's a lot of fun. Headhunter is not like this sort of be-all end-all belt that a lot of you guys who are familiar with PoE1. It's not nearly that powerful, but it's still pretty strong. Now, as for the helmet, this one is pretty flexible. You got to get attributes somewhere. It doesn't have to be here. You got to get some more res. Would like to get rarity, maybe percent evasion if possible, but you know, definitely going to want the huge life and accuracy on the helmet because it's a pretty easy piece to gear for. And then similar story with the gloves, although this one's a little bit harder since you're probably going to want attack speed up to 16% because that is actually worth about almost as much as a huge accuracy roll in the end. So you know, might think about dropping attack speed for other stats you need. I have done that before. I used to run Rarity on it. I don't worry too much about the flat damage rolls. You see I have a flat cold damage roll. I don't have one here. I'm not worried about it too much because we get so much flat damage through the Amazon Ascendancy anyway in this enormous spear. That is to say, if you have an enormous spear like this one, you'll get plenty of flat damage, and it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. In fact, let me just prove it to you right now. You see Twister is doing 119,000. If I simply remove the ring, you know, I only lost like what, 9% of my damage. So that's not even, and most of that is accuracy, or a lot of that is in the accuracy loss. So you can see it's not playing a huge role here. Don't worry about it too much. Looks like the only pieces left are the charms and the flask, so I went over Fall the Axe. I mean, this is pretty obvious. You're going to want to use this. I guess that insanely expensive Rarity Asmurian gold charm would be good. But definitely going to want Stone Charm, and Thawing Charm is really good. So these are the three I highly recommend. If you're going to run Ambrosio support, you really want a % increase charges, Ultimate Mana Flask if you can. Life Flask doesn't matter too much, I don't think. Really rarely ever have to use it. Doesn't have much functionality at all here. Next up, we'll talk about the gems. I'll just go from top to bottom. Infused Weapon is given through the Ascendancy, and I'm still running most of the same links I think I was before, except something major different has happened here. I used to have Ice Bite on either Lightning Spear, which I just kind of ham-fisted into the build for the heck of it, or Storm Lance when I was running it that way. But instead, you know, I get decent reliable uptime on this, and this is another reason why Cull the Brotherhood is so good, because when Infused Weapon works, we're getting Frenzy Charges and Power Charges, and it prioritizes the Frenzy Charges, which are lightning damage, for when the Twisters blow up and explode. So this makes, whether it takes on the Frenzy Charge version or the Power Charge version, all of it is cold damage, which means Ice Bite and Glaciation works decently here, because if Twisters happen to not kill an enemy and then explode near it, quite often it'll get frozen and it will give me Ice Bite. And Infused Weapon isn't going to have a huge amount of value on bosses anyway, and then Ice Bite, wherever it might be, wouldn't work too well there anyway. So I really like putting Ice Bite here as a sort of compromise. It's not the most reliable Ice Bite in the world, but I'm a big believer in Ice Bite as well as Innervate, and we'll see Innervate a little bit later on. Decent place to put it here, because the damage on this doesn't really matter that much in maps anyway. Whirling Slash is one of the, maybe the second most important skill on the list, so extremely important to have really smart links here. Martial Tempo and Bullseye, incredibly important here. Font of Rage is incredible here, that's why my Rage is just sitting at 30. And then the other two are a little more flexible. I used to have Unbreakable here, which is really smart to do. For most people, I might recommend like Cold Exposure and Unbreakable instead of Strip Away. I ended up putting Unbreakable on Wind Dancer, which is a new addition. It's somewhat useful there. But yeah, that's kind of the links I have for now. Twister, the most important link, because it's the one that makes the build. So the interesting thing here is we get so much flat crit that we can pretty easily cap crit with the help of Inevitable Critical. Since I'm using Salvo support, I'm not casting Twister but once every 4 seconds anyway, so I get the full benefit of this every single time. And then Overextend is going to be extremely good here too, since we're casting Twisters, at least if I have a Power Charge up with Charge Infusion, going to be 100% critical strike chance, or actually I think it might be like 99% currently in the POB, which is linked down below, you can see. That gives me another couple links to go off of, and I've talked about this before. Duration, speed, and AoE are three extremely potent effects for Twisters, what makes Twisters really fun, and they shotgun as well. Who doesn't love a shotgunning ability that benefits greatly off of all kinds of different variables beyond just more damage, okay? Now, I could just put more damage in here, and that would change the playstyle a little bit, but I really like Persistence and Acceleration. Persistence primarily so that I can overlap Twisters, especially on things like bosses or simulacrums, or, you know, just even in maps. I always have something out in the field that is leeching mana and life. It's really important, and always doing damage, always freezing things. Acceleration is really important because I need those Twisters to fly really fast, and even if I'm stationary in an arena or whatever, that's going to have great benefits, because the Twisters, one individual Twister can hit the same target many times, and it's total duration. So that's why the combination of these two is good. AoE would be pretty nice here, magnified effect that is. Might have some pretty awesome effects for Twister because it does play off of AoE. I haven't tested that a huge amount, but I decided it wasn't worth it because, you know, You only get 5 links in maximum anyway, and honestly, I wish Twister had 10 links, because man, I could put those to really good use. You can see I don't even have retreat support or anything like that, so not even a single, technically not even a single straight up % more multiplier support link here. That's how you know this skill is insanely strong. For the 5 best support gems that I've chosen, and 0 of them are a % more multiplier, with the exception of Overextend, which is kind of a special case, actually. Cull the Weak was a recent addition. I came out with a video talking about why I went this. I decided to go like full-blown damage on this, basically. This is the only decent way to place put Blindside, which honestly could be put on Twister, but it's nice to have the Twisters blinding enemies anyway. And then Concentrate Effect and Execute is a terrific link for this. Guys, it doesn't even matter if Cull the Weak culls an enemy. If it simply kills an enemy, you get the Frenzy Charge from that. So having a huge amount of damage on Cull the Weak is really smart here. And you can kind of port to an enemy. So you're kind of killing some enemies with Whirling Slash if they're really weak. You're killing a lot of enemies with Twister. But sometimes, you know, you can catch an enemy, you know, out in the open when all of its, you know, minions have died. Quite often a rare or magic enemy. And you can kind of pick it off and get an extra Frenzy Charge that way. Works really nice. I really love the gameplay of adding those two in. It makes the build way more robust. Makes it a lot faster. Adds a button, but gives me something more to do between the downtime of just clicking Twisters and moving around with Whirling Slash. I enjoy it quite a bit. I think it's like, it's leaps and bounds above any other choice that you could put here, given that it gives you a Frenzy Charge on kill, that it ports you forward on demand if you can target an enemy, and that it actually fills the gap with something to do a decent amount of damage, single target, even on a boss, like even on the Zesht fight. That's really nice to have that there. Barrage gives me all kinds of benefits, synergizes with Salvo, as well as just Twister being something I wouldn't want to cast unless I had 3 copies of Whirling Slash anyway. Barrage makes a ton of sense here with pre-med, and also being able to, you know, get twofold in there. It's just so good the way it syncs up with everything. It makes Twister a non-spam ability after, you know, you think about Barrage as well as Salvo. There are different ways to play Twister. You could spam them really fast. I mean, there certainly is a way where you can just like do this. And you can make a version of the build like this if you wanted without Salvo or Barrage. And that would work all right, but I definitely think this is a lot stronger to do. We used to run Cast on Freeze, but now with a better version of the build, we basically have a 100% crit chance. And then those of you who have played Cast on Crit know that it's way more reliable than anything. Not to say Cast on Freeze isn't reliable with all the Brotherhood in this build. It is, but Cast on Crit's still way better. And it's so good that you can actually support a double mark setup in here, where Sniper's Mark will override Voltaic Mark when it's off cooldown. I'll make a separate video on this in the future. Profane Ritual, kind of similar to playing Monk with Flicker Strike before. By the way, I did try Flicker Strike weapon swap in here. It's something I may look into again, but didn't work. It didn't seem to have enough damage. It needed a better weapon or something for that to make sense. The delay on the weapon swap still kills me on the inside. But anyway, Profane Ritual is giving us a bunch of extra critical hit chance through Charge Infusion, 20% more crit hit chance. So, I mean, that's just free crit, guys. I mean, that's crazy. That actually pulls me up from like 83% all the way to 100, basically. So it's really nice. It actually just straight up caps me out. And then I'm using Single Out because you'll notice that Armor Shred is like just incredible here. What did I say? Armor Shred is. I'm talking about Last Epoch on it. Armor broken. Breaking the armor is happening all the time, everywhere, always with this build. Twisters are just breaking armor like crazy. Single target bosses, immediately fully broken armor every single time. And it's just from this. It doesn't it costs me almost nothing to do that. And the Inspiration Support's good here. You can use the support gem that allows you to have double marks out at once, but I don't think it's really that beneficial. I mean, it's just proccing like crazy anyway. And I'm having more of an issue with mana, I think, from this than I am wanting to get like double marks out technically on the field. It almost doesn't even matter. You'll see Voltaic Mark going off on kill like multiple times a second potentially anyway. So I don't think it's really that useful here once you get the proc rate on Cast on Crit setup. Now, Combat Frenzy is the least important Spirit Gem at this point because we're already getting Frenzy Charges from Sniper's Mark. However, it's very unreliable in maps because if you kill, if the crit that would pull the sniper's mark off actually kills an enemy, you don't get the frenzy charge. So usually in maps, you don't get the frenzy charge. On bosses, you definitely do, but in maps, no. So the only other real reliable place is Cull the Weak. This does require me to focus a little bit extra hard on getting a lot of Cull out in order to justify dropping Combat Frenzy. I tried it for a while, didn't work out well for me. It just worked way better to keep Combat Frenzy in there, and one reason why I continued to keep Cull the Brotherhood in as well. There were other ways around this, like Cull the Brotherhood. You could, if you want, put Electrocute Link on Twister. You could try to put Pin into Cull the Weak, although that's a little redundant since you'd be getting frenzy charges if you're using it anyway. Anyway, you guys can choose, opt out of this if you want, if you're struggling with Spirit for sure, like getting it rolled on the Amulet's pretty rough, getting the Against the Darkness is pretty rough, but, you know, I'm just sticking with it like this. Charge Infusion is one of my favorites. I feel like a lot of people make builds, they really don't go for this. I feel like it's just so strong, especially Power Charge and the Frenzy Charge variant. Skill speed, more skill speed means, yeah, I'd be moving 12% more fast than what you see right there, even though that did look pretty fast. And then we just link this up with a couple things if you have room for it. You can see I'm floating a little bit extra. So precision, you really are going to want precision in here. That's quite a bit extra, but it's not the end of the world if you can't, like if you can fit everything in, but not precision and clarity, that's okay. Just go without precision if you know, if that's the worst of it. Wind Dancer is a new addition, and this is the most recent addition to the build. This is one I actually haven't made a video on as of yet, and so you're hearing this one for the first time, maybe. Link this up with Arm's Length and Punch Through. Actually gets a little bit of extra damage taken from projectiles, Maim, as well as Unbreakable and Heavy Swing. So Heavy Swing is a damage link, and Unbreakable's, I don't know if Unbreakable is really all that useful here. It's not like it works full time, just if you happen to be getting hit by Wind Dancer. Maybe it does actually immunize yourself from a stun when Wind Dancer goes off. Not quite sure on that. I'd look forward to hearing what you guys have to say if anybody's tested that and if you know. But Wind Dancer is just an incredible survivability tool, not because it's giving me a whole bunch of extra evasion. It really has nothing to do with the evasion. It has the fact to do with Gale Force having an incredibly low internal cooldown. That is to say, gain a stage every 1.12 seconds. I mean, I'm not at threat of dying from being surrounded by enemies more often than 1.12 seconds. Like, I might Shroud Walk into enemies. I've died a lot that way. I hardly ever die that way anymore because of Wind Dancer. I might just make a mistake and get caught on a ledge and just be, you know, just for some reason not react fast enough to, like, dodge roll off the ledge or something. And, you know, bad player performance sort of thing. I've died to that, of course, several times, and it tends to not happen nearly as often with Wind Dancer, and it just greatly increases survivability because I've noticed that a lot of my deaths before using Wind Dancer were just this sudden, just random, almost like insane RNG moment with a monster got the surround on me in between Twister casts. Maybe I didn't have Twisters out as often as I should have in that moment, and yeah, it just helps protect me from dying in that way. I don't think it's a huge deal against, you know, like bosses or whatever, but definitely helps a tremendous amount in maps, especially things like breaches where monsters spawning out of thin air, rituals, stuff like that. Alright, then we got Herald of Thunder, which is where Innervate is coming from. So Shock is something that's not in a build normally. If you have Cull the Brotherhood, you wouldn't have Shock, but I do because I get shocked to ground, as you can see. And so all I gotta do is just kind of run through enemies, through packs of enemies, and, you know, they're gonna be shocked. Innervate's gonna be going off. Innervate's going to be going off like crazy just doing that. Got to play more aggressively to get Innervate to go off reliably, and you're rewarded greatly for that. Something I love about the build, of course, because I like playing these sorts of builds aggressively. We have a melee/ranged build, but extra benefits for staying close. Not exactly like Point Blank's Keystone or something, but yeah, getting some cool incentives to work that in and be aggressive. Really like that. Something flavorful about the build that I enjoy very much. Elemental Focus is perfect here because you can no longer put any sort of elemental ailments through Herald of Thunder, so there's no downside to that whatsoever. Reach, I think, is really a good idea here as well because of just a huge % more area of effect. You can see my area of effect actually goes from 1.5 to 1.7, which may not seem like a big number, but that is quite a bit of an increase as Herald of Thunder hits everything in that AoE range, and so there's a whole bunch of damage overlap going on there. Long shot is pretty smart, kind of doubling down on reach. And by the way, I don't think there's any downside to reach because accuracy doesn't have anything to do with Herald of Thunder. So this could have been a mistake by the devs to allow reach support to even go in here, because I'm pretty sure there's no downside to the less accuracy here. And there's no, and that's why like Herald of Thunder doesn't have an increased crit chance. So Herald of Thunder doesn't synergize with Critical Strike, by the way. So that's what I mean. Like there's no upside to that Ascendancy point. There's no downside to this support. And then Lightning Mastery, or you know, something else. If you have anything else you can put in for more damage. Actually, that does remind me. Yeah, pretty sure through some other testing that I was doing that I realized that I probably wanted to use Pinpoint, although technically it's a lower number. I think it'll smooth over the damage a little better, so I'm going to switch to Pinpoint, and that'll be reflective in the guide. All right, let's go over to jewels here. We got some new jewels. I'm still using this one. I think this is a really good idea to have a jewel like this. Definitely crit multi is the best thing you put in here, but it's probably not as good as increased effective notable and passive skills, because that's going to be huge for cooked as well as stand and deliver. And a little bit extra for Catalysis. I used to run like Deft Recovery and or Death from Afar. I'm a big believer in just running Stand and Deliver, probably not Death from Afar, depending on, you know, if you have the crit multi-roll on the suffix or not. But I have Prog Speed and Attack Speed. Those are two very good ones as well. And it doesn't matter if it's a large or medium radius. Doesn't really make a difference unless you have increased effective small nodes. Then it would, I guess, make a difference for the crit multi. By the way, you wouldn't normally go crit multi, you would go crit chance, crit hit chance, but I'm going crit multi because I have an enormous flat roll on the spear, which allows me to have essentially 100% crit chance without needing any help on the passive tree. So that jewel's still there. I talked about how amazing that was in a separate video, and I'm still using it, so there's a testament to how good it is. If you need Spirit, and I do now that I have Wind Dancer as well as Combat Frenzy still in the build, so I need Spirit. I don't need 12, but I do need 11, and then damage is extra cold is pretty smart here. I think this will pay off well as well. If I switch out of Cull the Brotherhood, at least I'll still have a decent amount of cold damage in the build. That'll be nice. And so I miss, you know, having a really, really good basic Emerald Jewel that I don't have anymore, but this is going to be a good place to put it. And by the way, if you need a little bit of extra Spirit, I got a good idea for you. That's not a bad idea. Now you can see I'm having like weapon swap tech stuff in here. This is dead tech right now, don't worry about that. But for real though, if you wanted to, you could waste 2 points to get 25 dexed, and that would give you the extra bonuses through the Against the Darkness. You know, 25 dex for 3 points isn't terrible, okay? That's 8.33 dex per point, and so that's not a bad idea to do that for the extra Spirit, if that made the difference for you. I think I would do that. The last jewel is something else I made a video on, talking about all the different best in slot jewels for radius things for the Amazon. I did end up electing to go with one of those options that I mentioned before. Kind of surprised we're not using a Metamorphosis in this build, but I just can't quite justify it. Resolute Technique is putting me over here to get some extra passive point. By the way, the small nodes here, 10% increased skill effect duration, pretty good flexible slots to put in, like when you're kind of in that in-between skill point where you can't quite hit a notable or something. This is a great place to put them. We get 3% life and stun threshold. I get Overwhelming Strike. I'm probably the strongest crit wheel, especially if you're doing anything stun related. And then we also have Breaking Blows, which is pretty much 100% uptime on 15% area of effect, as well as some stun buildup. Seems pretty good to me. Honorary mention for 24% reduced slowing potency of debuffs on you is a huge amount for 1 point. And that'll conclude the jewels. If we go in here, let's scroll in here to see the Amazon. We already kind of mentioned these. These are pretty self-explanatory, but you know, this is giving me something like 18 or 19% flat crit with how much accuracy I have. And then this is giving me an absolute enormous amount of flat physical because I have 577 accuracy right now. And so that's, you know, where that is. And that's why flat damage, it doesn't really matter on the jewels or whatever. Then I'm going Elemental Infusion, and I'm doing this because it just works so well if you're already getting Frenzy Charges and Power Charges on the regular, and then you're also using Twister. It's not like, you know, Lightning Spear or something else where you're only using one at a time. I can dunk like 8 of those things at once with one Twister cast, which is pretty insane. And then getting the Ice Bite tech in there is really nice. Decided to go ahead and do Infused Avatar. I feel like the fourth Ascendancy Notable is really not that valuable. It's a bit of a toss-up between Predatory Instinct and Infused Avatar. I can tell you, In for the Kill is not any good. Mystic Harvest sounds good on paper. It's actually a bit overkill, though, I think. And the Stalking Panther, I'm not really taking advantage of that, especially with these boots. So probably not going to be that good. And then I don't think I'd ever do this. So I decided to just go ahead and keep it here because without this, not every twister will be infused. But with this, every twister will probably be infused. Or at least a lot more likely. Now for the rest of the passives, so the line basically goes this way, and it's pretty obvious why. We're trying to hit all the accuracy stuff. Get a little bit of int on here if you need it. You can see my attributes are kind of barely clearing. It's a bit tough to get the attribute requirements. This is 50% increased evasion and +1 max frenzy charge is really good. You'll notice I dropped fervor. Now it's in the guide here, but that's only if I was level 99, but I'm only level 95, so I'm not using it. That's partially because these 3 points are like totally wasted on the build, which sucks to get the +2. But at least in maps, I feel like the difference between a 4 frenzy twister and a 6 frenzy twister doesn't make a big difference. It does on bosses, but nah, not that much on maps. I really like the points down here to get all this accuracy, and then prog speed, I'm a big believer in it. Prog speed is really nice. So I decided to go all the way down here. Area of effect as well. This is crazy strong too with the attack damage and the skill, huge skill effect duration. Awesome points down here. I think if you're running twisters, a lot of people are running twisters without doing any of this. And the twisters are a lot less robust, shall we say. So I feel like as far as the way I've made the build, these are some really important points. Now the rest of this will be, you know, going down to cooked, getting maiming strike, and then, you know, doing all this stuff because we care so much about speed. Falcon dive is the build enabling point to give so much speed. Basically, I don't even move hardly at all with Whirling Slash if I remove that point. And then some of these are a little bit... yeah, all this stuff is actually like, if I were to make drastic changes to the build, I'd probably drop all of this here if I did. But I have thought about going all the way up here to hit this wheel and get a metamorphosis in here, get some crit, but I really just need about like 4 or 5 more passive points for that to make sense. You'd also have to like drop this stuff. And so, you know, at least with, especially with Cull the Brotherhood, Expose the Cosmos, super strong. And then Throat Seeker is crazy strong too, if you can work that in. And then this crit wheel, of course. So this is just seems to me to be the best, most point-efficient way to make the build around level 95, which is where I'm at. Getting all the major accuracy rolls, getting a whole bunch of crit multi, not all of it, but a whole bunch, and sacrificing the energy shield route and just relying on crazy amount of life leech to help. But of course, one-shots are in play, and this build is still technically a bit squishy. And, you know, part of that is from the balance of the game with ES being so strong. A lot of people are doing that, but I just cannot stand the way that ES recovery works now. Forgot the name of it. Grim Feast. Grim Feast in its 0.1 iteration, you best believe I'd be going ES if Grim Feast still existed, but it doesn't. So without that, you know, I don't want to just be trying to slam my flask all the time to get recovery, and it's a huge investment to try to get passive ES recovery. Why not just go for life recovery? And guys, you can get upwards of 3,000 life. If you were to get like nearly perfect rolls of life on every single piece, you can get upwards of 3,000. That is possible. So I think that's kind of next on my agenda. I'll try to do something like that. But anyway, these are the passive points. Didn't even mention the spear wheel. That's pretty obvious why you would do that. And then a couple of flex points are right here with Stalk and Leap, but I noticed in the PoB, these are a huge amount of damage. So that's 40% increased damage across 2 points effectively. All right, so as you can see, I'm using Maxroll for the build guide setup. I have just in the last couple of hours updated this. All right, so the rotation is, I don't think anything there has really changed. This isn't the most comprehensive build guide ever, but there are 4 different setups now with a new late end-game version that is in here as well, and this is set up the way I think it is, or should be. Fervor is included in there, which it is not on my build, because again, not quite level 99 is what that's set up to. And then these sort of optimized gear choices with, I think, up to 5 modifiers on the rares. This is how it might be set up. The goal is to have all life sockets in here if you can, but obviously the vast majority of people who were to try to follow this build, if you were to, it's very difficult to min-max everything, so you cover all the res and you get accuracy and life on every single piece, and then can still fit in just accuracy and not need any extra for attributes or resist, and also kind of sacrificing chaos res. Didn't even mention that. I think I'm running like 25 chaos res or something, but it seems to be okay, even in rituals, surprisingly. probably because it dominates rituals so insanely hard. But yeah, this is the sort of optimized setup, and I'm sure there is a better variant to this, maybe without Cull the Brotherhood, because that would open things up quite a bit. And here's a little Atlas tree, is kind of what I'm running. It's nothing super special. Nice setup for Breach. Focuses on pack size and increased effective waystone modifiers. I really like this setup. It really just feeds into the idea that you're going to get your quant and rarity through precursors and waystones, so why not just go waystone effect, roll some better waystones, and then get some pack size in there, because this is definitely probably one of the most underrated modifiers you can get on maps. It does roll on waystones, but typically don't prioritize it there. But that's definitely like a magic find-esque setup. You know, a lot of people running strong boxes, for example. I didn't have anything to do with that, so maybe I'll test those out later. But anyway, guys, this is the guide. It's done. It's ready to go. Still a level 5 complexity, I would say. But I feel like everything else is pretty true. Definitely top tier, absolute S tier for clear speed. Pretty good for bosses. Quite squishy. Well, it's not that it's quite squishy. It's just the recovery is so insane. Like, it's not that squishy. It's just the problem is, you know, one-shots occasionally can be an issue. But actually, the gearing's pretty easy. I mentioned Deadeye a little earlier. The gearing is quite easy for this. The weapon is expensive, but everything else is not that expensive. I mean, yeah, Headhunter is expensive. This particular Moira Invictus is, but they're luxury pieces. They don't actually make or break the build. What makes the build is a great rare weapon, and these 3 super cheap uniques. And then just getting all the accuracy, life, and res that you can on the other rare pieces. It's not that complicated in the gearing process. Alright guys, so that's the update for the build. I hope I didn't ramble too much. Tried to, you know, focus it in, just get it all out. Hey, you know what? I know that I've been coming out with some spicy comments. A lot of hot takes recently. I just want you guys to know that I appreciate your comments. Take it all in. I know I'm debating a lot of people. Forum warrioring it up a bit, but I like doing that. It's fun, and I'm really happy about the added dialogue. I think it's really struck a chord with a lot of people. I'm not going to comment on any one particular thing about that right now, because this is not the time and place for it, but I just wanted you to know that I am paying attention to it. There is one little thing I will say that is relevant to the build. One last thing. It's something that I've always known, but never really articulated or maybe actualized it until very recently. I had a really, shall we say, wholesome moment on stream the other day that I haven't made a highlight video for. And it was all about why some people don't enjoy PoE2 very much. And, you know, not being able to move fast enough, the game being too slow. And it occurred to me that one of the reasons why I'm enjoying the game as much as I am is because this build is really fun to play. Now, what do I mean by it's fun to play? I need to be stimulated when I'm playing the game. And one reason why I love PoE in general, PoE 1 in particular, is because I'm able to move really, really fast. And the stimulus is coming in like right and left. I'm running a very simple build. It's a tornado shot or something. It's like one click, and that's all I can handle. It really helps me hit that flow state because it's neither too hard nor too easy. It's not boring, but it's not like exhausting me either. And I can play for hours on end and enjoy myself while, you know, thinking of the forethought of my brain is able to think about other things, right? I get that in this game too, but I'm moving a lot more slowly. And the reason why is because I think I have more to do. There's actually more buttons to press. There's a bit of a rotation. Sometimes monsters interrupt me. I gotta focus on what I'm doing. And this build would perhaps be way too much to handle if I was moving so much faster than I am. Believe me, we're not moving anywhere near as fast as we do in PoE 1, even this build. And I'm just enjoying it so much because of the slower pace. Lines me up more appropriately with the flow state of a slower game. And so I'm still hitting that mark, for me, anyway. Now, I know not everybody is me, and maybe some people are you know, speed absolutists or whatever, but I think most people are really just trying to figure out where to hit that flow state, and that's going to determine whether they're going to enjoy the game. A lot of people picked up on this build when we talked about this on stream that day, and I think that was a terrific selling point for it. And it's probably one of the best things I can say about the build, especially in the current state of this game, where a lot of people, a lot of you, a lot of my viewers are not quite so happy about the slower game pace. It works out a lot better for you if you can figure out a way to integrate an interesting build that has a lot of payoffs for adding a few buttons. Not just adding buttons for the sake of it, but for it to have a really good reason and for it to make sense. And for this build, it does. Twisters, shotgunning, melee getting the extra shotgun effect, while being able to do a lot of damage at range, having it set up as a cooldown, having something to do on the downtime with Cull the Weak. I really like this build. It's been one of my faves, certainly in recent times. So there will be new things to come with the build, but anyway, that's all I want to say for this video. I appreciate you guys watching, and let me know if you have any other questions in the comments section. There's a lot of links down there, as well as that, of course, that Maxroll link and some other things, loot filters, that sort of thing. And so with that, I'll leave you guys now. We'll see you next time in another video. So, you've stuck around for the end. Here's your treat. I'm going to try to upgrade my weapon with crit multi. It would basically be a percent multiplier with whatever that number hits. If I hit 39%, which is a perfect roll, this build basically doing 39% more damage. Very important roll that I'm missing. Now, you will have noticed I also hit this here, but this has got a long ways to go. So, in the meantime, I would like to honestly, I don't know if I'll ever finish this. But this I can finish in a better variation with just one lucky whittle, and you know, it's already lined up, ready to go. I don't even need to worry about suffix prefix. Just hit this right here and get crit multi. It's as easy as this. 5 life per enemy killed. Not good. Try again. Done build up. Tier 1, not good. Try again. 17 dexed. I really wish it would have landed on this last, because this is actually a pretty decent settle, but it's not high enough. And I'm not settling, alright? I'm not settling. Should have settled. For the time being. Well, at least I got a little bit of motivation to keep farming some more currency, I guess.